Guys, President Trump said just this week that he wants to ban Wall Street and large institutional investors from buying more single family homes, and he will ask Congress to pass laws to do so. Now, the goal of this proposal is to address the housing affordability concerns and make home ownership more accessible for American families. Now, President Trump posted this publicly. The idea in and of itself sounds simple, right? If corporations stop buying homes, families, regular American families, can buy homes. But housing markets don't just move on slogans or tweets or whatever it is, right? The housing market moves on actual numbers, incentives, and more than anything, supply. Okay. So instead of reacting or us reacting emotionally to what President Trump put out there on his platform, let's slow this thing down a little bit and actually talk through what President Trump is proposing and what would likely happen next. Now, first, we need to be clear about one very important thing, okay? When President Trump says he wants to ban Wall Street, he's talking about institutional investors. That usually means these large companies, right? Private equity backed firms, real estate investment trusts, the huge ones, right? The REITs, and corporate landlords that own hundreds or thousands or sometimes tens of thousands of homes. So these are the professionally managed businesses that own properties, single family property. This is not your mom and pop real estate. So that definition of what is institutional investors or who is Wall Street is important. It matters because whether this policy works or not is going to depend entirely upon who is included and who is not included in that definition of institutional investors. Now, let's talk about scale for a minute, because this is really important, okay? This is where a lot of people get misled when they hear something like this. America has over 80 million single-family homes. Now, out of all of these single-family homes all across America, these large Wall Street-backed firms or institutional investors, they really only own about 450,000 single-family homes across America. That really works out to about 1%, right? Some sources you read, it'll say closer to 2%. So nationally, on a big scale, Wall Street don't really own America's neighborhoods for the most part. Not even close, really, right? If you lined up 100 single family homes across the country, about one, maybe two, would be owned by a large institutional investor. So that's important for us to really say out loud, because the headlines you read, they can make this thing feel like it's much bigger than it really is. Because here's the deal. Housing is not a national thing necessarily. Housing is, for the most part in America, local. That's why the same house in two different neighborhoods in the same city can cost two completely different prices, right? Because it's a local thing. And this is where President Trump's concern really sort of starts to make a little sense, right? Because while institutional ownership of single family homes is a small piece of the nationwide picture, it's concentrated in specific cities. See, after the 2008 housing crash, right? Wall Street didn't just go out and buy homes everywhere throughout the whole country. They bought homes in places where the homes were cheap, where the rents were going up, and where supply was really tight. I mean, think about cities like Atlanta, the DFW area, right? Dallas, Fort Worth, Phoenix, Tampa, Las Vegas, even a place like Orlando down in Florida, right? And other parts of South Florida. In some of these housing markets, investors weren't buying just one or two homes. In certain years, you had institutional investors buying one out of every four homes, right? Now, that doesn't mean they own a quarter of the homes today. It just means when families showed up to buy in that same area, those families were often bidding against institutional investors who had what? They had cash and they could get in and buy properties quickly, whereas a family couldn't necessarily do that. And that changes the experience for regular American buyers just trying to, buy a house for their family. They can't do it because you got this institutional investor in there buying things fast and buying things with cash. Now, let's talk about inventory, because this is probably the real issue underneath everything that we're talking about here. As we sit here today in early 2026, the U.S. housing market has about 4 months of supply. A healthy, balanced housing market usually has about 5 to 6 months of supply available. So in terms of supply, the American housing economy is still short. Supply is still low. And housing supply didn't get low overnight. For more than a decade after 2008, the crash in 2008, America didn't build enough homes, right? Builders slowed down building. Now, zoning stayed very restrictive in a lot of places. Construction labor got tight. And now you have financing costs that are higher as we speak than they have been. All of that stuff limits the amount of supply of available homes. So when something is scarce in any economy, like there's a limited supply, it gets more expensive. Always. That's just economics 101, right? So it doesn't matter whether the buyer is a family or the buyer is a corporation. Scarcity is the real driver that makes the cost of housing go up. So let's answer a big question, right? Would President Trump banning institutional investors help regular people buy homes, right? Let me know your answer to that question in the comments below. Is this a good idea for Trump to really pursue, or is it not? Let me know in the comments. The honest answer, in my opinion, is this. In some places, yes, it'll help a little. In cities where you have a lot of institutional investors and they are a large share of the buyers in that city, getting them out the way, removing them, could reduce some of the bidding wars, right? You'll have fewer all cash offers and less pressure on entry-level homes or people who are trying to buy a house for the first time. It would make more room for families to actually negotiate and buy their first home, for sure. That's real. That's, in my opinion, that's a real benefit to this whole thing. But on a national scale, I think the impact would likely be sort of limited, right? Why? Because most investors who buy single family homes are not institutional investors in the first place. They're really, your small LLCs, your smaller investors, your individuals who have a few properties. If a policy only targets the largest players, demand doesn't necessarily disappear. The demand actually just shifts to new people, new players, or new buyers. Capital always tends to find a way into the hands of the people who have the most money. That's just how it works. And this brings me really to my next question for you. Could this prevent institutional investors from becoming a bigger problem down the road, say 10, 15 years down the road, if some type of policy was passed? In my opinion, I'd say probably, right? But only under certain conditions. First, the definition of what is an institutional investor would have to be tight. We'd have to know exactly what that is. It'd have to be straightforward. If the rule only applies to companies above a certain size, then really money can be reorganized into smaller entities, right? That happens all the time. But here's the second thing. Supply would definitely have to increase. That's huge, because here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. And that is this. Wall Street didn't create the housing shortage. Institutional investors, they didn't somehow create the lack of supply in houses available out there. These institutional investors, they just showed up because the housing shortage already existed. When housing is scarce, guys, home prices keep rising. It becomes attractive to large pools of capital when the housing market is scarce. And who has large pools of capital? Well, large institutional investors. That's who. That's not really politics, okay? That's just how this game is played. Now, let's talk about the legal reality for this to really actually happen and occur. For President Trump's proposal to become law, Congress would have to act. That's a fact. The House would have to pass a bill. The Senate would have to pass the same bill. And then, of course, the president would have to sign that bill. So executive action alone from the president would be sort of limited, okay? And even if a law did pass, the details of the law matter more than the headlines, okay? Who is included? Who is exempt? What constitutes an institutional investor? How is it going to be enforced? All of those types of details would determine whether this actually changes markets or changes the housing market, or if it's just all talking points and politics, okay? So this is why housing debates can get so emotional, right? Because look, a home is an asset, and we talk about building assets all the time on this channel. Having some real estate, real property, a house, a primary, or even some rental property, that's huge for a lot of people. And it's a huge gateway into wealth building. It means stability, first of all. It means security. And for a lot of people, having a home still means identity. So President Trump is responding to a real frustration that a lot of people have in America right now. And whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like President Trump doesn't really matter. Many new or young people and older people, they want to buy a home still, but they actually can't because of the prices. And so a lot of people feel locked out right now. But listen, if you actually want housing to be more affordable over time, you have to address the supply. You can shift demand around the edges if you want to, okay? But you can't fix the shortage in the housing supply by simply banning certain buyers. That's not going to do it. You fix the shortage of the supply of housing, single family homes, by building more homes and providing some type of incentives to build more homes. So President Trump's proposal here, it raises some really important questions, guys. So when you see the headline that says President Trump wants to ban Wall Street from buying homes, this is what it really means. It doesn't mean housing is going to suddenly become cheap. It doesn't mean families are going to instantly win all of a sudden. No, what it really means is that we're finally talking about something super important. Who is allowed to compete for these scarce assets called single family homes, right? And why scarcity, or what I would call the lack of supply, why does it exist in the first place in the housing markets throughout America? And the real question going forward, guys, isn't just who is buying the homes, it's whether we're actually going to deal with the shortage that makes housing expensive, right? No matter who shows up with the money, large business, small mom and pop, doesn't matter. Look, guys, headlines change, policies change, markets change. And if you don't have a system of your own, you're always going to be reacting to what's happening on the outside. That's why I wrote Manage Your Way to Millions, guys, to help people think clearly, manage money intentionally, build your own system, and make good decisions no matter what's taking place out there in the larger picture of this economy. If you want the framework, the link to the book is in the description box below. And also, guys, in that description box, grab your free debt snowball worksheet. That link is going to be down there as well. Look, guys, I hope you got some value out of this video. If you got value, let me know in the comments. Just say, I got value. Share this video with your network of good people, and don't forget to drop me a comment below. I want to hear from you. The best person who's going to take care of the old you is the young you. Until the next video, peace.